Think about the last time someone made you angry. Really angry. Maybe it was a colleague who took credit for your work without a second thought. Maybe it was a driver who cut you off so aggressively that your heart rate spiked before you even had time to process what happened. Maybe it was a family member who said something so deeply unfair, so casually dismissive of everything you are and everything you have worked for, that the words sat in your chest for hours afterward like a stone you could not dislodge. Maybe it was a stranger online who left a comment so cruel and so deliberate that you found yourself composing responses in your head long after you should have been asleep. Now think about what that anger cost you. Not just in that moment, but in the hours that followed. The mental energy consumed by replaying what happened. The physical tension that lived in your shoulders, your jaw, your chest. The conversations you had with imaginary versions of the person who wronged you. The clarity and focus you lost because your mind was too occupied with the fire of what someone else did to concentrate on anything that actually mattered to you. That cost, multiplied across hundreds of similar moments across the months and years of your life, is one of the most significant and least examined sources of suffering in the modern human experience. And it is almost entirely optional. What if I told you that there exists a way of seeing the world, a complete, tested, battle-hardened philosophy of mind, that makes it genuinely, practically possible to move through your life without being chronically hijacked by anger, irritation, and the bottomless frustration of living alongside other human beings who refuse to behave the way you need them to? Not by becoming numb. Not by suppressing your emotions until they detonate in some far more destructive form. Not by pretending that nothing matters or that other people's behavior has no impact on you. But by developing a specific, learnable, daily practicable set of mental skills that fundamentally change your relationship with provocation, so that what used to take you down for hours now passes through you in minutes, and what once ruined your day now barely registers as a ripple on the surface of your calm. That philosophy exists. It is 2,000 years old. It has been tested by emperors who faced betrayal, slaves who faced brutality, and generals who faced death. It is called Stoicism. And the specific thing at its heart that makes all of this possible, the one master key that unlocks the entire architecture of emotional freedom, is what this video is entirely about. By the time this video ends, you will understand not just what that master key is but exactly how to use it, in your daily life, in your most difficult relationships, in your most triggering moments, in the quiet of your own mind when no one else is watching and the anger is entirely internal. You will understand why the Stoics considered mastery of this single concept to be the foundation of every other form of human excellence, more important than intelligence, more important than talent, more important than opportunity or circumstance or luck. You will have a framework so complete and so practically applicable that you can begin using it today. Not next month when you feel more ready. Not when your circumstances become less difficult. Today. In the life you are actually living, with the people who are actually in it, in the exact circumstances that are currently testing you most. This is the most important video we have made. Stay with me all the way to the end. Because what you are about to learn has the genuine power to change everything. The real source of your anger, and why it is never what you think. Before we talk about the master key, we need to dismantle the most fundamental misunderstanding about anger that almost every human being carries, and carries so automatically, so completely, that most people never even think to question it. The misunderstanding is this: that anger is caused by external events and external people. That when someone does something to you and you feel angry, the anger is a natural, direct, inevitable response to what they did. That they made you angry. That the situation made you angry. That if only they had behaved differently, if only the circumstances had been different, you would not have felt what you felt. This belief is so deeply embedded in ordinary human thinking that it feels like simple common sense. It is also, according to the Stoics, almost completely wrong. And understanding why it is wrong is the beginning of everything. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who spent the first decades of his life as a slave, with every external reason to be consumed by anger at his circumstances and the people who controlled them, identified the actual source of emotional suffering with a precision that modern psychology is only now beginning to fully confirm. He said, "Men are disturbed not by the things that happen but by the opinions and judgments they form about the things that happen." Read that again slowly, because there is an entire revolution in those words. The traffic jam does not make you angry. Your judgment that the traffic jam should not exist, that it is an unacceptable intrusion on your perfectly reasonable schedule, that the universe is being deliberately inconvenient, that judgment makes you angry. The colleague who takes credit for your work does not make you angry. Your judgment that this is a profound injustice, that it threatens your reputation, that it confirms your fear that you are not being seen or valued, that judgment makes you angry. The family member who says something cruel does not make you angry. Your judgment that their words have the power to define your worth, that they have violated a fundamental social contract, that their opinion of you matters enough to destabilize your sense of self, that judgment makes you angry. In every case, the event is one thing. Your interpretation of the event is another. And it is entirely, exclusively the interpretation that produces the emotional experience. This is not a semantic game or a philosophical sleight of hand. It is one of the most practically important insights ever articulated about the human mind, and its implications are enormous. Because if anger is caused by external events, you are permanently at the mercy of a world you cannot control. You will be angry every time the world fails to behave according to your preferences, which, given the world's complete indifference to your preferences, means you will be angry constantly. But if anger is caused by your judgments about external events, and if your judgments are something you can examine, question, and gradually change, then you have access to something extraordinary. You have access to the source. And when you can work at the source rather than endlessly managing the symptoms, everything becomes possible. This is what the Stoics understood. This is what the master key unlocks. And this is why Epictetus, a man who had every external justification for chronic rage, became one of the calmest, most grounded, and most psychologically free human beings in recorded history. Modern neuroscience has now confirmed what Epictetus intuited from pure philosophical reflection 2,000 years ago. Between any external stimulus and your emotional response, there is a gap, a space of cognitive processing, however brief, in which your brain is interpreting the event, assigning meaning to it, and generating a feeling based on that meaning rather than based on the event itself. This gap exists even in your most automatic emotional reactions. The anger that seems to arrive instantly is actually the product of a lightning-fast interpretive process that runs below the level of conscious awareness, but that does not make it fixed or inevitable. It makes it trainable. Your brain is not a passive receiver of emotional states. It is an active generator of them. And like every other generative capacity of the human mind, it can be trained, shaped, and gradually redirected through consistent, deliberate practice. That practice is what the rest of this video is going to teach you. The master key, understanding the dichotomy of control at its deepest level. The master key that the Stoics identified, the single concept that, once truly mastered, makes chronic anger and being bothered by others almost impossible to sustain, is called the dichotomy of control. You may have heard this term before. You may even think you understand it. But most people who know about the dichotomy of control know it at the level of an intellectual concept, a philosophical idea they find interesting but have not yet integrated deeply enough to actually change how they feel when life provokes them. Because the dichotomy of control, understood only intellectually, is a nice idea. The dichotomy of control, understood in your bones, practiced in your body, applied in real time in the middle of your most triggering moments, that is a transformation. And the difference between those two levels of understanding is exactly what we are going to bridge today. Epictetus opens the Enchiridion, his essential handbook on Stoic living, with a statement so simple and so radical that it has the power to reorganize your entire inner life if you let it land fully. Some things are within our power and some things are not. Within our power are our opinions, our intentions, our desires, our aversions, and in a word, everything that is our own doing. Not within our power are our bodies, our reputations, our possessions, our positions, and in a word, everything that is not our own doing. If you mistake what is not your own for your own, you will be hindered, distressed, and you will blame both gods and men. But if you take as your own only what is truly your own and regard what belongs to others as it truly is, belonging to others, then no one will ever be able to compel you or hinder you. You will blame no one, you will find fault with no one, you will do nothing against your will, no one will harm you, you will have no enemy, and you will not suffer any harm. Everything Epictetus taught, every other Stoic principle, every other technique and practice in this entire philosophy, flows from this one foundational distinction. Everything within your power. Everything outside your power. That is the entire map. And once you learn to navigate by it, you will never be lost in anger again. Here is why this principle is the master key to never being angry or bothered again. Anger, in virtually every form it takes, is the emotional experience of your will colliding with reality. Something happens that you did not want to happen, or something fails to happen that you desperately wanted to happen, and the gap between your preferences and the actual state of the world generates a charge of frustrated energy that your body experiences as anger. The driver cuts you off, you wanted a smooth journey and reality delivered an interruption. The colleague dismisses your idea in a meeting, you wanted recognition and reality delivered dismissal. The person you love says something hurtful, you wanted care and reality delivered cruelty. In every case, your suffering is generated not by the event itself but by the collision between what you wanted and what is. And the Stoics noticed that almost everything human beings get angry about falls into one category with stunning consistency, things that were never within their control to begin with. Other people's behavior. Random events. The way the world unfolds. The choices other people make. The opinions other people hold. None of these things were ever within your power. And getting angry at things outside your power is, as Epictetus would say, like shaking your fist at the ocean for being wet. The dichotomy of control does not ask you to stop having preferences. You are allowed to prefer that people treat you with respect. You are allowed to want good outcomes. You are allowed to hope that your plans succeed and your relationships flourish and your health holds and your work is recognized. The Stoics were not asking you to become an emotionless machine with no desires and no preferences. What they were asking, what they were training in themselves every single day, is that you hold those preferences lightly enough that when reality fails to honor them, your inner state does not collapse. That you want good things without needing them. That you prefer certain outcomes without being destroyed by the alternatives. That you engage fully with the world as it is while maintaining a clear and unshakable understanding of what is and is not within your power to change. That understanding, held not as an idea but as a living, practiced, moment-to-moment orientation, is the master key. And what follows from here is the training program for making it real. Why other people's behavior is never about you, the Stoic understanding of human nature. One of the most liberating insights in all of Stoic philosophy, and one of the most practically powerful tools for eliminating anger at other people specifically, is the Stoic understanding of why people behave the way they do. When someone treats you badly, when someone is cruel or dismissive or selfish or dishonest or deeply unfair, the natural human response is to take it personally. To experience their behavior as a statement about you, about your worth, your importance, your place in the world. And that experience of being personally targeted is a significant driver of the intensity of the anger that follows. If someone is rude to you in passing, you might feel mildly irritated. But if that same rudeness feels like a deliberate attack on your dignity, a conscious choice to diminish you, a statement that you do not matter, the anger becomes something far more consuming and far more painful. The Stoics offered a reframe so complete and so compassionate that it makes the second kind of anger almost impossible to sustain. Marcus Aurelius wrote in the Meditations, "Remember that this was a private journal, written for himself alone, not for publication or performance, that when he encountered people who were dishonest, cruel, selfish, or unjust, he reminded himself of a single truth: these people act this way because they do not know any better. Not as a condescending judgment but as a genuine philosophical observation rooted in the Stoic understanding of human psychology. The Stoics believe that no person chooses to be bad in the way that a person chooses what to have for breakfast. Every act of cruelty, every moment of selfishness, every instance of dishonesty comes from a place of ignorance, ignorance of what is truly good, ignorance of the consequences of their actions, ignorance of a better way to be. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "They are like this because they cannot see clearly." And a person who cannot see clearly is to be pitied and understood, not hated and resented. This insight does something remarkable to anger. When you genuinely understand that the person who wronged you is not operating from a position of clear, conscious, deliberate malice toward you specifically, but from their own confusion, their own fear, their own unexamined wounds and habitual patterns, the experience of their behavior shifts. It does not stop mattering. It does not become acceptable or something you should simply tolerate without boundaries or response. But it stops being personal. And when it stops being personal, the consuming fire of it, the part that keeps you awake at night composing arguments in your head, the part that makes you see their face every time you close your eyes, that part loses most of its fuel. You can address the behavior, set a boundary, remove yourself from the situation, or speak your truth calmly and clearly, all without the corrosive acid of personal anger eating through you from the inside. This is the Stoic approach to other people. Not naive, not passive, not a doormat, but genuinely, practically free. Marcus Aurelius developed a specific morning practice around this insight that is worth adopting as your own. Each morning, before leaving his private chambers to face the demands of the day, he would remind himself of the following: "Today I will meet people who are rude, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, and selfish. They are this way because they do not know the difference between good and evil. But I know this difference. And knowing it, I cannot be harmed by their ignorance unless I choose to be. I will meet each of them with patience, because we are all part of the same human community, and their errors no more disqualify them from my basic goodwill than my own errors disqualify me from theirs." This is not a passive script. It is a deliberate preloading of perspective, a way of preparing your mind before provocation arrives so that when it does, your response comes from your philosophy rather than your instinct. Try it for 30 days and watch what changes. The practice of the pause, building the space between stimulus and response. We have established the intellectual framework. Now we need to talk about the actual practice, because understanding the dichotomy of control and the Stoic view of human nature at the level of ideas is valuable but insufficient. The gap between knowing this and living this is the gap between reading about swimming and being able to swim. It can only be closed through practice. And the most fundamental practice, the one that makes every other Stoic technique possible in real time, is what we are going to call the practice of the pause. This is the skill of creating, in the critical moment between provocation and response, enough space for your rational mind to engage before your emotional autopilot takes over. It sounds simple because it is. It requires enormous consistent practice because it is working against years of deeply established neural habit. And it is the single most transformative thing you can begin doing today. Epictetus described this practice with a phrase that translates roughly as, "Withhold your assent." When an impression arrives, when something happens that would normally trigger an automatic emotional response, do not immediately agree with the first interpretation your mind offers. Do not automatically accept the story that this is a catastrophe, that this person is an enemy, that this situation is an unbearable injustice. Instead, pause. Create a gap. Even 2 seconds. Even one conscious breath. In that gap, you have the opportunity to examine the impression rather than simply reacting to it. To ask, is this interpretation true? Is it the only possible interpretation? Is acting on this impulse aligned with who I want to be? What would the person I am trying to become do right now, in this moment, with this specific provocation? These questions do not need to be asked one at a time in a calm and leisurely fashion. With practice, they become a near-instantaneous internal orientation, a reflexive checking of experience against values rather than a slow deliberate analysis. But that reflex is built through repetition, and repetition requires starting with the slow and deliberate version. The neuroscience of this practice is remarkable and worth understanding because it explains why it actually works rather than simply sounding like good advice. When a provocation triggers your amygdala, the part of your brain responsible for the fight-or-flight response, it initiates a cascade of physiological changes that prepare your body for immediate action. Heart rate increases. Stress hormones flood your system. Blood flow is redirected away from the prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational thought, perspective-taking, and value-aligned decision-making, and toward the motor systems that support immediate physical response. This is why anger makes you feel like you cannot think straight, you literally cannot, in the acute phase of emotional activation. The pause, the practice of creating even a small gap before responding, gives your prefrontal cortex time to come back online. It interrupts the automatic cascade long enough for your more sophisticated cognitive capacities to participate in what happens next. This is not weakness or avoidance. This is the deliberate activation of your most powerful mental faculties at the exact moment they are most needed. Building the practice of the pause begins outside of your most triggering moments. You cannot develop this skill for the first time in the middle of a genuine crisis. You develop it in the small provocations of ordinary daily life, the minor frustrations, the petty irritations, the slight annoyances that do not feel high stakes enough to really test you but that happen frequently enough to give you dozens of practice opportunities every single day. The driver who is slow to move when the light changes. The colleague who sends an email with a tone that feels slightly dismissive. The family member who makes a comment that grazes against an old wound. In each of these small moments, practice the pause. Notice the first impulse. Feel the energy of it without acting on it. Take one breath. Ask one question: is this response the one I would be proud of? Then choose your response deliberately. Over time, over weeks and months of consistent practice, this pause becomes faster, more automatic, and more available precisely when you need it most. The Stoics called this the training of the will. It is the most important training a human being can undertake. Amor fati, learning to love what is instead of raging against it. There is a concept at the heart of Stoic philosophy that goes beyond merely tolerating what you cannot change and asks something far more radical. What if you could not just accept the difficult, the painful, the frustrating, and the unfair, but actually love it? What if the things that currently make you most angry, the obstacles, the failures, the people who wrong you, the circumstances that refuse to cooperate with your plans, could become not just bearable but genuinely welcome? This is the Stoic concept of amor fati, a Latin phrase that translates to love of fate. And while it initially sounds like either madness or masochism, it is actually one of the most psychologically sophisticated and practically powerful ideas in the entire Stoic tradition, and one of the most direct paths to permanent freedom from anger. Amor fati does not mean pretending to enjoy pain. It does not mean performing gratitude for things that genuinely hurt you or acting as though injustice is somehow fine. What it means, at its deepest and most practical level, is this: everything that happens to you is material. Every obstacle is raw material for strength. Every betrayal is raw material for wisdom. Every failure is raw material for resilience. Every difficult person is raw material for patience and compassion. Every circumstance that enrages you is, if you are willing to look at it this way, an invitation to develop exactly the capacity that life is currently testing in you. The Stoics did not merely accept this as a consolation for suffering. They trained themselves to experience it as a genuine and immediate truth, to look at a difficulty and see, in real time, the specific gift it contains. Marcus Aurelius expressed this beautifully and practically in the Meditations when he wrote that the impediment to action advances action, what stands in the way becomes the way. He was not speaking philosophically in the abstract. He was describing a lived experience, the experience of a man who had genuinely trained himself to see every obstacle not as a barrier to his purpose but as the specific medium through which his purpose was being expressed and developed. The war that prevented him from pursuing philosophy became the context in which he practiced philosophy most deeply. The betrayals that could have consumed him in resentment became the material through which he practiced forgiveness and justice. The illness that threatened to diminish his effectiveness became the ground on which he practiced equanimity and the acceptance of his own limitations. Nothing that happened to him was wasted. Nothing was simply endured. Everything was metabolized into wisdom, strength, and a deeper understanding of what mattered most. You can begin practicing amor fati today with a simple daily reframe that the Stoics would recognize immediately. Each time something happens that makes you angry, each time a situation arises that your first instinct is to resist, resent, or rage against, ask yourself one question before you do anything else: what is this making possible? Not in a forced, artificial, toxic positivity kind of way, but with genuine curiosity and genuine willingness to look. What strength is this difficulty asking me to develop? What wisdom is this frustration trying to teach me? What is becoming possible in my life because this obstacle exists? You will not always find an immediate answer. Sometimes the gift is not visible until much later. But the practice of asking the question, consistently, honestly, and without requiring an immediate answer, gradually rewires your default relationship with difficulty from resistance to curiosity. And curiosity, unlike resistance, does not produce anger. The view from above, dissolving anger with perspective. One of the most immediately effective techniques in the entire Stoic toolkit for dissolving anger in real time is a practice that Marcus Aurelius used throughout his reign and described repeatedly in the Meditations: the practice of deliberately shifting your perspective to a much larger scale than the one your anger is currently occupying. We are going to call it the view from above. And while it sounds abstract, it is one of the most practically powerful things you can do in the middle of a genuine bout of anger or agitation to interrupt its momentum and restore your sense of proportion. Because anger, more than almost any other emotion, is a product of tunnel vision, of being so close to a situation that it fills your entire field of view and seems, from that proximity, to be of enormous and permanent importance. The view from above does not deny the reality of the situation. It simply restores the context in which that situation actually exists. Here is how Marcus Aurelius practiced it. When he found himself consumed by a political crisis, a personal betrayal, or the kind of grinding daily frustration that comes with governing the most complex human organization ever assembled, he would deliberately zoom his perspective outward. First, he would see himself from above, a single person in a single room dealing with a single problem. Then he would expand that view to see the city around him, the thousands of lives being lived simultaneously, each one carrying its own weight of difficulty and hope. Then further, the empire, the continent, the civilizations that had risen and fallen on this same ground across the millennia. Then further still, the planet itself, small and temporary in an incomprehensibly vast universe. And from that perspective, whatever had seemed so urgent, so catastrophic, so infuriating a moment ago would appear for what it actually was: a tiny, temporary, local event in a story so vast that its scale could barely be comprehended, let alone adequately captured by the heat of any single human emotion. The practice works not because it minimizes your pain but because it accurately represents the actual scale of most of what makes us angry. Think about the things that have most enraged you in the past year. The argument you had. The slight you received. The plan that fell through. The person who let you down. Now ask yourself honestly, in 5 years, will this matter? In 10? In the full sweep of your life, looking back from the end of it, will this moment, this specific anger, this specific provocation, have been something worth the hours of mental energy you poured into it? Almost always, the honest answer is no. The view from above is not about dismissing the present. It is about accurately calibrating the present against the full context in which it exists. And that calibration, applied consistently in moments of anger and frustration, is one of the most powerful perspective tools ever developed. You can apply the view from above in any moment of anger or agitation in less than 60 seconds. Close your eyes if you can, or simply shift your internal focus if you cannot. See yourself in the space you currently occupy. Then expand: the building, the neighborhood, the city, the country, the planet. Spend just a few seconds at each level of expansion. Feel the scale shift. Then come back to the specific situation that was making you angry and look at it from where you just were, from the perspective of a person who has just glimpsed the full context of their existence. Notice what changes. Notice what remains. Usually, what remains is the practical reality of the situation, the thing that may genuinely need your attention or your action. What dissolves is the heat, the urgency, the sense of cosmic injustice, the consuming fire of it. What is left is clear enough to work with. And clarity, unlike anger, is actually useful. Dealing with difficult people, the complete Stoic approach. We have talked about the philosophical framework, the master key, the practice of the pause, amor fati, and the view from above. Now we need to get very specific and very practical about the thing that makes most people most angry most consistently, other people. Not abstract circumstances, not random events, not the universe's general indifference to your preferences, but specific, named, recurring human beings who have a remarkable and apparently inexhaustible ability to get under your skin. The colleague who undermines you consistently. The family member who pushes every button you have with what seems like surgical precision. The friend who repeatedly fails to show up in the ways you need. The boss who manages through fear and favorites. The stranger who seems to exist specifically to test your patience. The Stoics had a complete, nuanced, and extraordinarily practical approach to all of these people. And it is the approach that will free you from them more completely than anything else you have ever tried. The first element of the Stoic approach to difficult people is what we have already discussed, understanding that their behavior is not about you. It comes from their own ignorance, their own wounds, their own unexamined patterns. But the Stoics went further than simply not taking it personally. They recommended a practice that most people find initially almost offensive in its generosity, actively wishing difficult people well. Not as a performance. Not as a forced spiritual exercise. But as a genuine philosophical practice rooted in the understanding that a person who treats others badly is, in the most fundamental sense, suffering. They are in the grip of ignorance, fear, or pain that is expressing itself in behavior that harms the people around them and, although they cannot yet see it, ultimately harms themselves most of all. The Stoic response to this recognition is not condemnation. It is something closer to compassion. And compassion, unlike contempt, does not produce anger. The second element is the practice of clear-eyed expectation management, a practice that Epictetus was particularly direct about. He taught his students to think carefully about what they could realistically expect from the people in their lives given those people's actual demonstrated character and capacity, and to calibrate their expectations accordingly. This sounds cold, but it is actually one of the most compassionate things you can do, both for yourself and for the relationship. When you expect a person who has consistently demonstrated that they are incapable of a certain kind of behavior to suddenly produce that behavior, and they fail to do so, your suffering is generated not by their failure but by your unrealistic expectation. Adjust the expectation to match the reality of the person in front of you, not the person you wish they were, but the person they actually are, and you remove the collision between expectation and reality that produces anger. The third element of the Stoic approach to difficult people is the practice of boundaries without anger. The Stoics were not passive or spineless in their relationships. They were clear, direct, and willing to act when action was required. But they acted from values rather than from anger. They set boundaries not because they were outraged at being wronged but because certain behaviors were incompatible with their own standards and their own well-being. There is an enormous practical difference between setting a boundary from a place of anger, which tends to escalate conflict, invite defensiveness, and produce a battle of wills, and setting a boundary from a place of calm clarity, which tends to be more effective, more sustainable, and less costly in terms of your own emotional resources. The Stoics would say, deal with what needs to be dealt with. Speak what needs to be spoken. Set what limits need to be set. Do all of this from your values and your clear-eyed understanding of the situation. And do none of it from anger, because anger makes everything worse and solves nothing. The evening review, building permanent change through daily reflection. All of the practices we have discussed in this video, the pause, the view from above, amor fati, the Stoic approach to difficult people, are real and powerful tools. But tools only produce results when they are used consistently, and consistent use requires a structure that keeps you honest and keeps you growing. The Stoics understood this. They were not people who learned a principle once and assumed it was integrated. They were people who returned to their principles every single day, examining their behavior against their ideals with unflinching honesty and renewing their commitment to the practice with every passing. The primary structure they used for this daily honest reckoning was the evening review, a practice that Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca all recommended in various forms and that all three clearly practiced themselves. The evening review is simple in structure and demanding in practice. At the end of each day, before you sleep, in the quiet that follows the noise of everything the day contained, you sit with 3 questions and answer them with complete honesty. The first question: where did I lose my composure today? Not in a spirit of self-flagellation or harsh self-judgment, the Stoics were explicitly clear that excessive self-criticism is itself a form of indulgence that serves no productive purpose. Simply, where did I get angry, irritated, or bothered when the Stoic framework I am practicing says I did not need to be? The second question: what was the trigger, and what judgment was I making about it that produced the emotional response? Remember, the event is one thing. The judgment is another. What specifically was the judgment that generated the anger? And the third question: what would I do differently if I could revisit that moment with the understanding I now have? This practice does several things simultaneously that make it extraordinarily powerful for building genuine long-term change in your relationship with anger. First, it keeps the day's emotional events from simply receding into the past unexamined, which is what happens for most people, meaning the same patterns recur indefinitely without ever being consciously addressed. Second, it develops your capacity for the kind of honest self-observation that is the foundation of all genuine growth, because you cannot change what you cannot clearly see. Third, it builds over time a detailed map of your specific triggers, your specific recurring judgments, and your specific patterns of reactivity, a map that becomes increasingly useful as a predictive and preventive tool. You begin to know, before situations arrive, which ones are most likely to test you and in what specific ways. And that foreknowledge gives you the ability to prepare rather than simply react. Seneca practiced a version of the evening review every night and described it in his letters with remarkable honesty about his own failures and his own progress. He wrote that each evening he submitted his entire day to scrutiny, reviewing his words, his actions, his responses, his choices, not as a judge looking for reasons to condemn but as a doctor looking for symptoms to treat. He found this practice not depressing or exhausting but genuinely energizing, because the act of honest self-examination combined with the genuine intention to do better tomorrow produces a quality of forward momentum that passive drift through life never can. The Stoics called this making progress, not achieving perfection, not arriving at some final state of enlightened calm, but moving steadily and honestly in the direction of the person you are committed to becoming, one evening review at a time. What mastery actually looks like, the long game of Stoic practice. We need to address something directly and honestly, because this video would be incomplete without it. Everything we have discussed today, the dichotomy of control, the practice of the pause, amor fati, the view from above, the approach to difficult people, the evening review, all of these are real, tested, extraordinarily powerful practices. But they are practices. Not switches. Not revelations that, once received, instantly transform your emotional life. The Stoics never promised instant transformation, and any honest account of Stoic philosophy has to be clear about this. What we are describing is a path, not a destination. A training program, not a cure. A way of living that gets progressively richer and more effective the longer and more honestly it is practiced, and that requires, at every stage of that practice, the same commitment to showing up that it required on the first day. Marcus Aurelius wrote the Meditations over many years of practice, and even at the end of that period, even as one of the most philosophically sophisticated and genuinely practiced Stoic practitioners who ever lived, he was still writing to himself about falling short of his own ideals. Still reminding himself of principles he had known for decades. Still returning, with patient and non-judgmental consistency, to the same foundational practices he had been returning to since the beginning. This is not a failure of the philosophy. It is a testament to its honesty. Becoming genuinely free from chronic anger and the perpetual irritation of being bothered by others is not a destination you arrive at and then inhabit forever without further effort. It is a direction you move in, consistently and with increasing skill, for as long as you are willing to practice. And the quality of life available in that direction, the daily experience of someone who has genuinely internalized these principles and genuinely practices them, is so different from the quality of life available in the reactive, anger-driven alternative that the practice sustains itself once it has gone deep enough. What mastery actually looks like, in the day-to-day experience of someone who has practiced Stoicism seriously for a significant period of time, is not the absence of provocation or the disappearance of difficult people and frustrating circumstances. It is a fundamentally altered relationship with all of those things. The same events that used to hijack your entire day now register and release in minutes. The same people who used to live rent-free in your head for hours now occupy a much smaller and much less powerful space. The anger still arises sometimes. The Stoics never claimed to have abolished human emotion, only to have changed their relationship with it, but it arises more slowly, peaks at a lower intensity, and passes more quickly. And between the moments of genuine difficulty, there is a baseline quality of calm and groundedness that was simply not available before the practice began. That baseline is the dividend of consistent Stoic practice. It is what you are working toward. And it is entirely, genuinely available to you. The Stoics measured progress not in grand transformative leaps but in the accumulated effect of small daily improvements, what they called making progress, or in Greek, prokopton. Each day that you practice the pause even once. Each time you apply the view from above and feel the anger dissolve a little faster than last time. Each evening review that reveals a pattern you had not previously seen clearly enough to address. Each morning that you begin with Marcus Aurelius's reminder that you will encounter difficult people today and that you have already decided how you will meet them. Each of these small practices is a deposit in an account that compounds over time into something genuinely extraordinary, a mind that is not permanently serene but permanently capable, permanently resilient, and permanently oriented toward the kind of freedom that Epictetus found in chains and Marcus Aurelius found in an empire and Seneca found even in the final moments of his life. That freedom is real. It is available. And the path to it begins today. Subscribe, join the Stoic Mind community. If you have stayed with this video to the end, if something in what we have explored today has genuinely landed, has shifted something in how you see your own anger and your own capacity to be free from it, then I want to say something directly to you. You are already practicing. The willingness to sit with these ideas for this long, to genuinely engage with the challenge they represent, to take seriously the possibility that a different relationship with anger and with being bothered is available to you, that willingness is itself the beginning of the practice. And beginning is everything. Marcus Aurelius began. Epictetus began. Seneca began. Every person who has ever moved in the direction of genuine emotional freedom began exactly where you are right now, with the recognition that the life they were living did not have to be the only life available to them. This channel, Stoic Mind, exists to walk this path with you. Every single week we bring you the deepest, most honest, most practically applicable Stoic wisdom we can find, wisdom that does not stop at inspiration but goes all the way through to transformation. We make videos for people who are serious about this. Who are done being hijacked by their emotions, done being controlled by other people's behavior, done living at the mercy of a world they cannot control. If that is you, if you are genuinely ready to build the kind of mind that nothing and no one can permanently disturb, subscribe to Stoic Mind right now. Turn on the notification bell. Share this video with one person in your life who you know is exhausted by their own anger and ready for a different way. The Stoics believed that the greatest gift one person could give another was a pathway to freedom. This video is that gift. Your subscription supports us in continuing to make it. And your practice, starting today, starting now, starting with the next moment that tests you, is your gift to yourself. We will see you in the next one.